there, knitters. Welcome to episode 20 of Knit Talk with a Tech Editor. I'm Megan of the Unapologetic Knitter, and I'm a tech editor. I can't believe we've already done 20 of these. As you start to record 17, 18, and 19, you start to go, ooh, maybe this is something, but when you hit that 20, it just feels like you've accomplished something. I hope wherever you are today that you are staying cool and comfortable. We are in the middle of quite a heat wave here in Oregon. Actually, I think pretty much the entire world right now is under a heat wave. So I hope you are staying cool and comfortable and safe and drinking lots of water as you knit. Today we are going to be talking about helical knitting one last time. As we've sort of discussed over the last couple of weeks, I knew nothing. Well, I understood what was happening with helical knitting, but I had never practiced it myself. So over the last 3 or 4 weeks, I've been spending a lot of time knitting a lot of garments with, some are mini garments with stripes in them to understand how the method works. And I had the most fun this week playing with striping of multiple colors and multiple widths. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to have lots of top-down views of swatches that I've knit up so we can talk about the pros and cons of each method so that when we're done with today's episode, you feel fully confident in handling anything that you want to do with helical knitting. The first variation on helical knitting that I want to talk to you about today is garter stitch in the round. And you may be asking yourself why you would bother working one color in the round using helical knitting. And it has to do with the jog that we get at the beginning of round. So here's an example of a sweater that I knit up last summer. This is the Summerlicious Tee by Jennifer Shields Toland, and it starts with a garter stitch collar. Now, when I knit this sweater, I didn't really understand all the ins and outs of helical knitting, and I said the exact same thing to myself that I just said to you. If I want to use one color, why would I bother doing helical knitting? And this jog at the beginning of round is exactly why you want to do helical knitting when you're doing garter stitch in the round. When we transition between our knit rounds and our purl rounds in garter stitch, when we work it in the round, we end up with this visible jog. You can see where the two rounds sort of stack one on top of each other. This one's higher than this one, and you get a bit of a jog. Now, when you're doing something small like a collar like this, that becomes a wonderful detail to work into your project, but it is fairly unnoticed. However, if you're working a much larger project that has a lot of garter stitch in the round, you probably want to avoid that jog. So, the pro of working helical knitting in one color in the round is you pretty much mitigate those jogs. However, I do think that there are a couple things to consider. When you're working helical knitting in garter stitch, even if it's the same color, you still require 2 skeins of yarn. One skein will be used only for purl stitches, and one skein will be used only for knit stitches. So there is still a yarn management issue. And I'm just going to demonstrate how this works. So I have just finished working a bunch of knit stitches until 3 stitches before my purl stitches were completed. So I drop my yarn from the knit stitch skein, slip my 3 stitches purlwise, pick up the yarn, and now I'm going to purl across these stitches that are all knit that ended the previous knit round. So we're going to purl to the end. Now, this is where we come to the other sort of con of garter stitch in the round using helical knitting if you, like me, have some tension issues. So when I'm working on a circular needle without using the magic loop method, this would not be a problem whatsoever. But if you're doing helical knitting on DPNs or magic loop, actually I'll do it at the other end so you can see it easier. You may find that you have a small difference in your tension with your purl stitches. You can see that mine are a little bit larger, and that's where the transition between the 2 needles occurs. If I'm knitting magic loop in just stockinette stitch, I don't have the issue, but transitioning between one needle and the other for purl stitch, I always get a little bit of a loosey-goosey stitch there. I think that would probably work out with blocking, but it is something I wanted to point out. Okay, so just going back to where we ended there, we were knitting to the end of the row in our purl stitches. Now we're going to reposition our needles and continue in purl stitch all the way until we get to 3 stitches before our last knit stitches. Now we're back to 3 stitches before where we dropped our knit skein, and we're going to drop the purl skein, slip our 3 stitches purlwise, pick up the knit skein, and continue around. So it is very similar to working striping or blending of 2 colors of yarn, but because you're using just one color, you'll designate one as your purl skein and one as your knit skein. The next iteration of helical knitting stripes that I wanted to talk to you about is using 1 row stripes using multiple colors rather than just 2. So you may remember from last week I had this little sample knit up to replicate garter stitch shaping using 2 colors. What I did from there is essentially bound off the stitches between the markers for the sleeves of our little raglan yoke and proceeded to add 5 new colors of yarn and worked each one as a single round color stripe down the body of this little sweater. And now I just feel like I need to find a little person to give this to. I don't have children, so I don't have anyone small in my life to give this to. But I kind of feel like a little kiddo would look really cute in this sweater. Anyway, so I'm going to turn this around and line up all of the yarns so that you can see what the yarn management system is. And while I won't physically demonstrate how to knit the stitches, because it is still just knitting, I'll explain to you the techniques that differ from when you're doing striping with just 2 colors or trying to blend 2 skeins of yarn. All right, so now we've got our colors all lined up in the order that we work them from. But this picture is probably a little bit deceiving. So once I joined the new colors, I worked down the body in this order. So my striping sequence was purple, green, white, dark gray, light turquoise, darker turquoise, cream. So that's the sequence of colors going from left to right across the screen. However, as you're knitting, your colors are kind of going in the opposite order around your Well, no, I guess that's not true. They are going in the right order, but as you're working through the colors, your tails of your yarn are sort of cycling around your work, so everything gets a little crisscrossy. So yarn management is a really big deal with this method. What I ended up doing is, let's say I was working with the purple yarn. Once I got all the way back around to my stopping point, I gave the work a twist the opposite direction, 1 full circle, so that the remainder of the yarns stayed untwisted. So whatever method you can use to manage your yarns will make this process a lot more joyful, but it is worth it in the long run. So the last color we finished our last stripe with was this lovely cream colored yarn, which means that the next color in my sequence is the purple yarn. You may notice that the next color of yarn next to the cream is not the purple. So this is the big difference between working with two colors like we did in the previous episodes where we were striping with just 2 colors and striping with multiple colors. When you come to the end of your current color, instead of just slipping 3 stitches to begin working with the next color available, you actually slip all of your stitches all the way to the beginning of where you started. How do I say that? You slip all of the stitches until you get to the yarn of the next stripe in your sequence. So I'm going to be slipping past the aqua or the turquoises. Now I'm slipping past the white, past the green, all the way until I get to my purple yarn where I want to start knitting my next stripe in the color sequence. So rather than slipping 3 stitches, I'm slipping 18 stitches because I've got 6 colors between my last color and my starting color, and each one I'm slipping 3 stitches. So I know I'm in the right place because I've got the right color of yarn attached, and I can see all of the subsequent stitches that come around are in the cream colored yarn. So I would knit all the way around until 3 stitches before the end of my cream colored yarn. You're going to do this same method over and over again, switching through the colors in your color sequence as you go up the body. And what I found most amazing about this method is, well, I don't know if it's amazing, most challenging, maybe that's a better way to say it, is there's a very noticeable change in where your colors are in a striping sequence. So my beginning of round marker is here. So I wanted to make sure I worked a full round of every color all the way down the body, which meant that I got 5 stripes of each worked sequentially down. I find using the aquas the most obvious. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stripes of the aqua. If I turn my garment to the other side, I still have the full 5 stripes on what I would consider the front. However, now that we're back, oops, I lost my needle. That's okay. It's not really necessary to have it in there at this point. When I get back to the end of the round and I say, okay, I've completed 5 stripes of each color, you can see that they start to sort of dive off of the needle, right? We haven't completed every single color all the way to the end of the round. There is no way to mitigate this that I can see. In last week's video, I talked about knitting to the end of the round with the other color so that when you work a bind off or a separation of the yoke, you have both of your colors at the beginning of round. However, if you tried to do that with all 7 of these colors, you would end up with a stack of 7 rows of color at the end of your round, and then your striping would be uneven. So I hadn't necessarily intended to originally include this, but then I remembered that knitting and YouTube are visual, so I figured why not? This is the back of the project I was just telling you about where the colors dive off the edge. And I thought it would be worth showing you what happens if you decide to knit all of your colors to the beginning of round so you end up with perfect, complete stripes all the way across the front and the back of the body. So I took out the beginning of round marker because that goes here and simply knit all of the stitches to complete every stripe to the beginning of round. And while it looks lovely from this view, we run into a bit of a problem when we get to the beginning of round. Our stitches no longer line up. We've got 6 additional rounds of knitting beyond the work, so we have a massive jog. If we were to try and bind off all of our live stitches now, because we've completed all of our stripes and perhaps wanted to finish the sweater, we would have a very hard time mitigating that jog. If you bound off all the live stitches and connected those 2 ends, you'd have a big pucker of work that you couldn't do anything with. So that's my physical demonstration of what maybe not to do when you're trying to end your stripes at the end of a round. So I will say, use this method with caution. I think it would be really fun on, say, a crown of a hat where you can start to work it into the decreases a little bit, or on a cowl where it's perhaps less critical to have a specific length and you can just stop your color work when you get to the length that you want it to be. But it may not be a perfect solution for a garment. Our third and final variation on helical knitting is taking a look at working striping, but using using different depths of stripes in your work. If you look closely here, we've got 2 rounds of gray alternating with 1 round of teal. And I can just about guess that you know exactly what I'm going to say at this point. It's worked very similarly to a combination of garter stitch that I showed you at the top of this demonstration and the multicolor stripe that we just worked. We will have 1 ball of the teal yarn attached and 2 balls of the gray yarn attached. So you still need to have 1 skein of yarn for each round that you plan to work, even if they're the same color. So you can see at the top of my swatch here, I've got 2 tails of gray and 1 tail of teal, and the same at the bottom here. This is where I started my beginning of round, and this is where I joined my other yarns to begin the striping sequence. Okay, friends, so there we are. We are done with helical knitting. At least I think we are. I have definitely talked about everything that I have learned over the last several weeks, but if you have questions about helical knitting, please feel free to send them in. I'm happy to start learning more about the technique if you guys need to learn anything new. So because I have spent so much time deep diving into this technique, next week we're going to talk about something that's a little bit more near and dear to my heart that doesn't require as much research on my behalf. We're going to talk about test knitting. I've had quite a few questions asking about what the rules are, what the responsibilities are, and what the etiquette is. So we're going to spend a really relaxing, hopefully 20 minutes or so together talking about how to be the best test knitter that you can be for designers, or how to entice test knitters if you're a designer and you want them to start test knitting for you. Thank you so much for joining me this week. As always, I enjoy spending time with you. If you liked this video, you know the drill. Give it a like. Please feel free to subscribe to my channel. It always helps the YouTube algorithms know that I'm doing a good job and send more knitters my way. I look forward to seeing you again next week. Have a wonderful rest of your week and weekend, and happy knitting.